Hey, how's it going, everybody? It's Terrence here with fishnetproductions.com. Got another quick video for you today on mastering. Now, mastering has been made out into this really huge concept as if it's this large esoteric thing that only certain people can do, and there's a lot of conjecture going on behind it on whether or not you should master your own music or not, if you've mixed it and stuff like that. But what I want to show you here is that mastering is not really that much of a complicated issue once you get it down to its basic roots. And it's also not that different from mixing at all. So I'll show you what's going on here. I have a track here that I've mixed for a client, and the mix is pretty much done on it. I've rendered it down to a single WAV file here in Cubase, and I'll let you take a listen to the track so you can hear what's going on. All right, take a listen. Now, after listening to the track, we can tell what type of song this is. This is a sort of R&B hip-hop style song, and that in itself will give us a sort of gauge as to how to go about mastering this song, because as you know, in certain genres of music, there are typical things done to, music in certain genres. So, a hip-hop master may be a little bit different than, say, a rock master or something like that. Now, usually what I recommend at this point is that you have some sort of reference track that you're referencing this to, because all you're basically trying to do in mastering, besides get the track up to a certain volume, is to get it to a particular style based on your own particular tastes. So if you say, for instance, like dark mixes or brighter mixes or something like that, that's what you're going for. There's no one way to do this mastering in terms of those type of things. The only stationary thing that you would probably be doing across all masters is probably getting it up to a certain volume, and of course the way you do that is through some EQ, compression, and limiting. Okay, so from here, now let's talk about the mastering chain, the typical mastering chain that you would see in a master. So I'll pull up my mastering chain here. Now, as you can see here, I have all of these plugins on the 2-bus in Cubase. Now, typically the first thing that you start off with is EQ in your mastering. So I'll pull up the EQ here. What I'm using is the Waves HEQ here. I really like this EQ in mastering, so I'll engage this, and you can see what's going on. Now, what I like to do is a bit of mid-side processing in my masters. So I'll show you how I'll go about doing that. But let me just name this other part of the chain for you. So what I have here is EQ, have a compressor, and then I have an exciter here. Now, typically here, you could do something like an exciter or, some tape saturation or something of that nature, whatever plugin you have, or, where you want to flavor your mix with. And then from there, I have a stereo enhancer where I'll do some sort of stereo enhancing, basically. And then from there is the limiter. And then here, the last thing in the chain I have pulled up is Ozone, in which the only module I'm using on this is dithering. So this is basically just a dither, where I will dither down the mix to an MP3. Okay, so now let's start with the EQ, and let's look at the EQ here. What we'll do is some mid-side processing. So I'll change this now to the mid-side, and I'll start with the side, and you can hear that. Now, what I have here is just the sides of the mix. If you don't know about mid-side processing, you can look that up, but basically it's the difference between the sides of a mix and the middle of a mix. So what I'll be playing here, and what you'll hear here, is the side. So what you'll probably hear is this sort of out of phase sort of thing going on. So take a listen to what that sounds like. Yeah, sort of phasey thing going on right there. So what I'm going to do on the sides here is, what I always like to do is turn on a high pass filter. So what I'm going to do here is take all of the low end, or at least most of the low end, out of the sides of the mix. I like my low end in my mixes to kind of stay centered. So if I pull it out of the sides, all of the low end information that's on the sides of this mix, it'll sound more centered, and you'll hear that in the mix. So what I'll do is I'll let this play, and I'll drag this high pass filter up until I get most of that low end out. All right, so let's do that. All right, so what we heard is a lot of that low end information leave the mix, a lot of that kick drum and a lot of the bass that was in the sides and some of the reverb that was carrying over from those low end information instruments that are going to that side. Now you hear it off. So let me A and B that so you can hear what that sounds like. I'll start with it off and then I'll turn it on. Here we go. So you hear how it kind of pulled that low end information out of the sides, that kick drum mostly, and a lot of that low end reverb out of the sides. So just that one move kind of gave us some centering of that kick drum and the low end information in the mix. All right, so let's keep going from there. So basically, again, what I'll do on this side channel is the second thing I like to do, since I like to pull all the low end out of the sides, I like to add a little bit of top end on the sides from about, I guess, about 4 or 5K on up, so I can, you know, pretty much hit most of the instruments that have that information in it, like the vocals and some of the strings and stuff of that nature. So I like to pull that up just a little bit so I can have some brightness in the mix. Now this is basically a shelving filter here. I always do this with the shelving EQ. So I'll pull this back to about 5K or so, and we'll mess with the mix here and let's see what happens when we pull it up a little bit. Typically you want to stay in the 1 maybe 2 dB range. Even that's kind of pushing it to me. Somewhere around 1.5 for me is always enough for me. So let's check that out and see what that does to the mix. Just the sides. Here we go. So basically all we've done there is provide a little bit of air to the mix, a little bit, the vocals stick out a little bit more. It just gives a little bit of overall brightness to the mix. Okay, so let's move on to the middle of the mid side processing in this EQ. So let's change this to middle and we'll just give a listen to this center channel by itself. All right, so let's take a listen to that. Okay, so nothing specifically wrong with the center of the mix here. What I want to do is, like, I like to do some opposite processing. Since I took some of the low end out of the side channels and I added some high end. I kind of want to do a little bit of the opposite to the center. Okay, so on this center, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a high pass filter. I always like the high pass all the way up to about maybe 30, 35, just to take all of that stuff that you really can't hear out of a mix anyway. And you see it has some information down here and then mix. So that'll kind of tighten up that low end. So that's the first thing. The second thing I want to do is take a regular Bell filter EQ and just boost up just a hair, even maybe about 0.5, 0.6, 0.7, 0.5, something like that. Around that 75K area where I'll get that kick drum and that bass line that's going on in the mix. Because what happened is once I subtracted it out of that center channel, it did center it, but by definition that means some of the volume is gone from the mix. Not much at all, just a hair. So that's why I'm only boosting this about 7.75. So no big deal there. Same thing with the high end here. So since I boosted this on the side channels, I'm going to take a little bit of the same amount out on the center channel. So about 1.3 or something like that, not too much. So I have some opposite processing here. Now that's basically what I've done on this EQ. Now this EQ and mastering can be done 100 different ways. This is just a particular way I like to do it with mid-side processing. You could just do a regular EQ and have this EQ going over the mix however you would like to have it, but I'm just showing you one method that I use of doing it. All right, so now let's take a listen to the mix, and I'll A and B this. I'll start with this whole thing off and I'll turn it on and you can see what it's doing to the mix just with this EQ alone. All right, so here we go. Okay, I like what this is doing. So now let's move on to the compression. Now with compression, a lot of people like to use multiband compression, and I use multiband compression quite a bit myself in mastering. But for the sake of this video, I just wanted to keep it simple and use a simple compressor and show you how this is done. Now again, typically with compressing and with most plugins and moves and mastering, you want to keep it really simple, really subtle, not a lot of big moves. So all we're going to shoot for here is just to try to balance this mix out a little bit. The low end is kind of sticking out, poking out of the low end a little bit, especially since we did that slight boost in the center on the EQ. So it's kind of poking out a little bit. So what I want to do is kind of create a sort of straight line balance across this mix with this compression. So here is the Waves SSL bus compressor. Have the ratio set to 2.1, attack all the way slow, release all the way fast. So what we're going to do here is dial back the threshold until we get about 2-3 dB of compression. So, or until we hear that balance going on with that bass and in the mix. All right, so let's do that. All right, so now that compression did exactly what I expected it to do. It gave me some balance across that mix, and now the low end is not poking out so much as it was before we did the compression. Really simple compression move. Now, if you were using multi-band compression, you could do this across multiple bands. I typically only use about 3 bands, so I kind of do low, mid, and high on my compression, and whatever those crossover points is, I determine that in the music. So again, this was just a simple way to show you how to do this compression in mastering. So now let's move on to the exciter. Now this is where things start to get really interesting in mastering, and this is where a lot of your particular tastes and flavor come through on your masters. So as I mentioned here earlier, this is the place where I'm using an exciter. Typically you can use anything like an exciter, or some tape saturation, some analog flavor, anything that you want to use right here. And my only recommendation about it is that you keep it really subtle. Now here I have the Waves Aphex vintage exciter, and I'm just going to apply just a hair of this. You may not even be able to hear it much. I have it set to a preset which is called Dark Mix, and I have it dialed to 0 right now, and all I'm going to do is dial this up to 2.5 dB or so. What I'm going to keep this on, so about right there, and it's going to be a very subtle thing. So I'll start with this off, and then I'll turn it on, and you can see if you can hear that. But if not, I like to keep this subtle. I don't like to do it any more than that. I'll boost it up a little bit in this mix so you can just kind of hear it, but I'll back it off for the final mix. All right, so check this out. This is what it sounds like. So you can hear what the exciter is doing right here. Once I boosted it way up here to about 5.5 or so, I'm going to back it back down because again, typically exciters are not a thing I typically like to have a lot of on my masters. So again, I'll back it down to about right here, just so you can sense it more than you can hear it. But that's what an exciter is doing, basically adding a little high-end flavor and stuff to your mix with some saturation and stuff like that. So it just depends on which one you're using, but this is something I like to keep really subtle. So I'll leave that on, and now we'll move on to the stereo enhancing. Okay, now stereo enhancing is another one of those simple, subtle things that you can do in your masters to kind of help spread your mix out a little bit. Now typically this can also be done with multi-band. So it's multi-band stereo processing where you can take, you know, the low end and spread it, or, you know, keep it as narrow as you like, all the way up to, you know, the high frequencies, and you can do as many bands as you would like. But again, for the sake of this video and for the simplicity, I'm just going to use one stereo enhancer, and this will enhance the entire mix. So what I'm going to do here is, you'll hear this, and all I want to do is take this up to about, this is where the mix is already at 100. I'm going to take this up to about 125, maybe let's try 130. And you can see what that does to the mix. It'll just spread it out just a little bit to kind of give it a little bit, give that sense of widening in a mix. So I'll start with that off, and you can hear what it does. Check it out. Really simple and subtle moves here. And I want to say, guys, I just want to interject here and say that it's mastering is really about those really simple and subtle moves that add up over time. And you'll hear once I'm finished with all of these plugins and this change, and I'll A and B everything, you'll hear what difference just these little subtle moves are making overall. All right, so now let's move on to the limiting. Okay, now limiting and maximizing here is one of those things that, again, is full of opinions and conjecture about what you should do and what you shouldn't do. This is one of those things, you know, where you'll hear the debate about the loudness war and so forth and so on. But be that as it may, we'll get this mix as loud as we possibly can without it, you know, destroying the dynamics of the mix. Typically what you want to do here is have some sort of metering system. Basically what I'm going to use here, just for the simplicity of this video, is just the metering system on the 2-bus here in Cubase. So we'll see where this thing here is peaking at once we do this limiting. So here I'm going to set the ceiling for -0.3. This is a typical thing you set it at. Some people do it up to, you know, -0.5 or something like that, just depending on your mix. I'll typically do this with a very loud rock mix, but standard, most simple thing, I'll just keep it at -0.3 just to keep any peaks from going up over 0 dB. So I'll engage this, and all I'm going to do is just pull down this threshold, really simple move, until I'm getting this up and just getting just a little bit of limiting here. You'll see the attenuation here on this meter. Oh, and before we do that, I should say that if you're listening to this on headphones or speakers, just start to turn your speakers down a little bit. This is kind of where it gets kind of loud, especially if you're in a place where you can't play loud music or something like that. This will kind of get a little bit louder than what we've had in this mix so far. So, all right, here we go. All right, really simple. All we have here is about 3, maybe 4 dB of attenuation from this limiter, from this brick wall limiting, so you're not getting those peaks that are going up over this -0.3. And it's as simple as that, guys. Now, a lot of this can be made out into more complex things. As I said, with all of these plugins, the EQ, the compressor, the exciters or the saturation, the stereo enhancing, and the limiting can be made out into these very complex things. And that's, you know, if that's what you choose to do, that's up to you. But at its basis, this is what limiting, this is what mastering is about. Now basically all I'm going to do from here is just turn on this dither. I have the dither. I'll show this to you how I have it set on this particular thing here. So as you can see, I have all of these modules turned off. The only thing on here is the dither. I have it where I'm going to dither down to the 16-bit. This is just particular things. I'm not here to talk about this particular plugin, but these are just particular things that are showing me what's going on in this mix. So again, here all I have turned on is the dither. Now let's take a listen to this mix. Now for the sake of this video, again, I'll turn the limiting off so you can hear an unbiased thing what's going on with the mix with all of the rest of the plugins. I don't want you to think that this louder mix is better because I have the maximizer on and the threshold set here to where it's giving me a louder mix. So I'll A and B these plugins and you can hear what just these simple moves has done to this master. All right, check it out. Alright guys, it's as simple as that. That's mastering in a nutshell. Again, this process can be made out into several different things, and I'm not saying this is the only way to do it, but if you're mastering your own music and you're just starting into mastering, this is a really good opening, a really good beginning concept to learn how to master your own music. This is basically all you're doing. This is a typical chain that you use, starting with EQ, compression, your saturation, and your stereo enhancing and stuff like that, and then the last thing you put on there is your limiter, and then from there when you dither down to an MP3 or whatever, if you're changing the sample rate and bit rate of your mix, you know, you use dither, and that's the last thing that will go on in your chain. So again guys, it's as simple as that. You can master your own music, start out doing it this way, learn from there, get on some of the forums and stuff about mastering, see what other people are doing, because again, there's many ways that this can be done. But I just wanted to point out in this video that there is no one single way to do things, and it's all about your own particular taste and how you like to operate with your own music. Alright guys, so that's it for this video. Listen, leave a comment below and let me know what you guys are using in your mastering chains, and if this video has helped you out in any way. Also, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, make sure you go do that now. I'm going to be putting out a lot more videos soon about mastering and mixing techniques, and you don't want to miss those. So go ahead and hit that subscribe button right now. It's in the right hand corner there, and I will see you guys in the next video.